Questions are being asked in the UK about whether the media played a major role in the death of a professor who was at the centre of a plagiarism row. Here's some background from the BBC.
3 years ago, Jason Arday made history, becoming Cambridge University's youngest ever black professor. But earlier this month, he was at the centre of a plagiarism row, and last week he quit his role with immediate effect. Last night it was confirmed that Jason Arday had been found dead. Since his appointment as a Cambridge Professor of Sociology of Education in 2023, Professor Jason Arday regularly appeared in the media talking about a variety of subjects from his personal journey into academia.
There's one thing you said to me which I never forgot, and it was when I was 22 and I said to you I was thinking about doing a PhD. And you said to me, like, you know, it would be the greatest story in the world if the kid who didn't know how to read and write managed to get a PhD.
But there were recent allegations of plagiarism and questions about some of his achievements. He denied the claims. He admitted errors in his work, but said he had faced an unrelenting level of public scrutiny and personal attack and was not a liar. Some critics had said the treatment of him had been motivated by racism, but others said the claims of plagiarism were legitimate. A former colleague and friend told the BBC he had spoken to Jason Arday yesterday morning.
Over the last few weeks, since the plagiarism allegations came to sort of national news and then international news, he was being subjected on an hourly basis to ridicule, humiliation. He told me this morning that he couldn't leave his home because his face was now so well known, his name was so well known, that he was a figure of shame.
Look, the loss of any life is a tragedy. And there's no doubt this man had been under enormous media scrutiny just before his death. Now there are calls for a public inquiry into Arday's death, with Labor MP Diane Abbott and actress Jamelia Jamil among 30,000 signatories of a letter to the Prime Minister, which claims Arday's death followed 2 weeks of relentless harassment. Now, that's interesting because harassment, in their terms, is the media reporting on a big story in the UK. Now, people are accusing it or saying it was racism, and I'll get to that in a moment. But let me go through what he'd been accused of. He was accused of plagiarism and falsification within parts of his published research. There were questions had been raised about the credibility of claims in his academic work more broadly, which drew intense media scrutiny. Cambridge opened a formal investigation in early August following new information about Professor Arday's qualifications and honorary appointments. There were claims of fabrication within his autobiographical accounts of his life, including his widely publicised story of having been an illiterate mute child due to severe dyslexia. A Telegraph investigation reported that schoolmates remembered his account of childhood illiteracy differently than what he had described it. There were also questions surrounding claims about his athletic and fundraising accomplishments. Now, as you saw in that report, there are questions about the role the media played in his death. But the fact is, this guy used the media for his own advancement, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when you've done that, and when you've been in the public eye, when a story breaks about you, shattering the myth that you have created, yeah, the media will keep digging. People are clicking on those articles. But that digging is being seen as racism. Have a look at this story from the UK's Channel 4 News.
Arday became the youngest black professor in Cambridge's history in 2023, and questions over his academic credentials have been swirling for some time. For some, his backstory was too hard to believe, and many tried to pick holes in it. Arday was autistic and said he didn't speak until 11.
I went to university at 20, but had the reading age of a 9-year-old. You know, so you're trying to really kind of...
Really? I mean, is that possible?
Yeah, it is.
Allegations against Arday's work resurfaced recently when this former Cambridge researcher Nathan Kofnas published claims of plagiarism in the professor's work. Kofnas had his research role terminated over his views on diversity in 2024. He argued true meritocracy would push out black people in higher profile roles, including Harvard professors, to zero. Arday then suffered a relentless campaign of coverage against him, with his stories making headlines around the world. There were articles asking questions about his life before academia. Was he really on a popular TV show, 7 Up? And how long did it really take him to run from Edinburgh to London for charity? The stories went deep into his personal life.
In the last 9 days, there was 188 newspaper articles about Jason Arday. Right? You do not see that same level of scrutiny, that same level of coverage about other cases of plagiarism, other cases of people exaggerating their CVs.
Is it because he was a black professor?
There is no doubt that the fact that he was a black man was a contributory factor, if not the major factor, as to why the coverage that he received and the coverage of the case he received.
Look, I'm actually going to say there is some truth about the amount of coverage being linked to his race, but it's not for the simple reason he was black and that the people doing it were racist. It's because he was held up as a poster boy by the University of Cambridge and central to its plans for a diversity push, with the press release even saying a major focus of his work will be supporting Cambridge's wider efforts to recruit a more diverse range of students and staff. And yeah, 188 newspaper articles over 9 days is a lot, but not totally unexpected from a story that is making national and international news. That's not racism, that's news. As for the claim a white plagiarist wouldn't get the same coverage, well, to be honest, it depends on who it is. If you are someone like Arday, who makes a lot of media appearances, is the subject of high-profile pieces, and is a high-profile person, then yeah, the media will pounce. That's across any race. It doesn't matter whether you're black or white. But one of Arday's friends wasn't having any of that, even making this shocking statement live on Channel 4.
But I do want to stress here, this isn't just a tragedy. A man was lynched yesterday. Like, when you talk about those amount of articles, and you can't just blame Cambridge University. This is the media. This is 188 articles. This is constant scrutiny. This is people outside of his house, even today when he's died. This is unprecedented. And I want to stress this very clearly. If he was white, he would still be alive.
That's bullshit. And look, I understand people are hurting, but that's such a simplistic thing to say. And it's a victimhood to say if he was white, he would be alive. You don't know how anyone is going to react to pressure. He admitted he made mistakes. He denied all the allegations. I'll have more on that in a moment. But the fact is, in our lives, we don't know the one thing that we would say to someone that may set them over the edge and do a terrible, tragic thing. He was under a lot of pressure. There is no doubt about that. But to call it racist, if there had been a white academic with his profile in the exact same position with accusations of plagiarism, and then accusations that their whole life story had been full of lies, especially when you said you were mute and that you had all these issues, hurdles you had to get over with. No wonder he was a poster boy. But when that story comes crashing down, that's not racism to follow that up. You don't get a free pass just because you're black. You're held to the same account as everyone else, and that's equality. But let's go back to that interview with Kendi Andrews, because the presenter obviously followed up that line that he used to describe it as a lynching. Have a look.
A lynching?
What else could you call it? So you have people like Nathan Kofnas, who, let's just say these are racist ideas, who put this idea out there that he's Victim of we still hear this. You did it today in the same story. Victim of, he was allegations of plagiarism. Those allegations were investigated and he was cleared. I read his PhD a year ago and said this is not plagiarism, and he was cleared. Yet that's still part of the story. And then all of this resounding pressure, media pressure around him, memes on TikTok.
Okay.
I would have said before it was metaphorically a lynching, but like I said, he's now dead because he's black. What else do we call that but a public lynching of this man?
Look, this guy's hurting. He's a friend. I get all that. But read the plagiarism. What he's referring to there is Liverpool John Moores University. That was where Arday did his PhD. Now, the claims of plagiarism were investigated and they actually cleared him of wrongdoing over those claims in his thesis. But that clearance has been contested by journalists and critics who argued the volume and pattern of alleged copying went well beyond what the clearance addressed. In fact, there were apparently 188 sentences in one tally. Now, Nathan Kofnes, he was the one who alleged Arday had plagiarized a peer in his 2015 PhD thesis. Now, that was the piece that triggered the public unraveling. Kofnes was a researcher who had been dismissed from his role at Cambridge in 2024. Now, that was because there was controversy over a blog post, and you heard that in the BBC report. He argued that under a genuinely meritocratic system, black people would be underrepresented in higher education. What he was saying is that his view is that different races have different levels of intelligence, and if you weren't having diversity inclusion programs, you would not have as many black people in positions of power because they aren't as intelligent. Now, look, that is not something I agree with, but even if this guy's views are racist, it doesn't mean the allegations put forward by him about plagiarism aren't true. Two things can be true at once. Kofnes might be a racist, but Arday might also be a plagiarist. And this is the problem. There's grey area. It's not black and white. But to accuse the media of a lynching, well, that's a problem. And it's just not true. We can't have an equal society if every time you question someone, you are allowed to ask certain questions only if they're not black or not a minority. True equality means treating everyone equally. And that is the biggest problem in this discussion, that people don't believe he should be held to the same standards as white people because he's black. And that is a serious problem.